Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Wednesday, April 8th, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. The high in Riverside today will be 85.2 degrees, with a low of 58.4. It is shaping up to be a warm day, so please keep the temperature in mind if you have plans to spend time outdoors. On today's program, we are breaking down the details behind the newly established and delicate ceasefire between the United States and Iran. We will also examine the legislative efforts in various states aimed at protecting oil companies from facing legal action over climate change concerns. Beyond those major stories, we have a full lineup of other important updates to share with you as we keep you informed on everything happening in our world today. All of this and more on Alex's News. Stay tuned. We begin this morning with a dramatic turn in the Middle East. After 40 days of conflict between the United States and Iran, a ceasefire is now in effect. Ethan covers national security for us and has been tracking the story around the clock. Ethan, walk us through what happened overnight.
Grace, as of early this morning, we have a 2-week ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran. NPR and PBS News both confirmed the agreement came together late yesterday and into the early hours today. It followed one of the most alarming moments of this entire conflict, a public ultimatum from President Trump that had world leaders scrambling. The truce is being called double-sided, meaning both nations have committed to halt offensive operations against each other.
Let's talk about that ultimatum. What exactly did the president say?
Yesterday morning, President Trump posted on Truth Social that, quote, "a whole civilization will die tonight," end quote, if Iran didn't reopen the Strait of Hormuz by 8 p.m. Eastern. PBS News reports the threat involved massive strikes on Iranian civilian infrastructure, things like power plants and bridges. It was an extraordinary escalation, even by the standards of this conflict. The president ultimately pulled back from that threat, and he credits last-minute mediation for changing the timeline.
Who stepped in to broker this deal?
Pakistan played the central role here. President Trump told reporters he delayed the strikes because of direct intervention by Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and General Asim Munir. Al Jazeera also noted that China played a secondary part in facilitating back-channel dialogue. So you've got nuclear-armed Pakistan essentially putting itself between two warring nations, which is a remarkable diplomatic gamble. Formal negotiations are now set to begin this Friday in Islamabad, so Pakistan will continue hosting this process.
Both sides are claiming victory. How does that work?
It's a classic case of spin. Iranian leaders are calling this a triumph for national unity and resistance. Meanwhile, President Trump told AFP it represents, quote, "a total and complete victory," end quote, for what he calls peace through strength. Critics cited by the Washington Post suggest the U.S. may actually be looking for a face-saving way to de-escalate. They point out that Iran still holds significant leverage over global oil markets, even after 40 days of American strikes.
There's a 10-point plan at the center of all this. What's in it?
Iran submitted a 10-point peace proposal, and the Trump administration has called it a, quote, "workable basis," end quote, for the Friday talks. NPR and PBS News obtained details on the key provisions. Iran has committed to a complete and immediate reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, which carries about 20% of the world's oil supply. But there's a catch. Iran's military says it intends to regulate and coordinate ship passage through the waterway, which could still give Tehran considerable control.
What else is Iran demanding?
The big-ticket items are sweeping. Iran wants every primary and secondary U.S. sanction lifted entirely. They're also demanding war reparations for reconstruction after the bombing campaign. And perhaps most provocatively, the plan calls for a complete withdrawal of American combat forces from all bases across the Middle East. That last point alone has Gulf Arab states deeply nervous because they see those U.S. bases as their security umbrella.
There's also a dispute over nuclear language in the proposal. Can you explain that?
This is a genuinely alarming discrepancy. The Guardian and the Hindu flagged that the Farsi language version of the plan explicitly demands acceptance of Iran's right to enrich uranium. But the English version, shared with some international journalists, left that phrase out entirely. So depending on which document you're reading, you get a very different understanding of what Iran is asking for. President Trump has called the enrichment clause in the Farsi version, quote, fraudulent, end quote. That disagreement alone could derail the Friday talks before they even begin.
Now, does this ceasefire extend beyond Iran itself? There's been confusion about Lebanon.
There really has, and it's a serious problem. NPR and Al Jazeera report that Pakistani mediators have said the truce covers, quote, Lebanon and elsewhere, end quote, meaning it should apply to Hezbollah and other Iranian-backed groups. But Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office directly contradicted that. Israel says it supports the pause in strikes on Iran, but insists the ceasefire does not include Lebanon. Israeli airstrikes on Hezbollah targets in Beirut, Tyre, and Sidon continued today. Hezbollah says it won't stop fighting unless Israel does first.
So we essentially have two different interpretations of the same deal.
Exactly. Analysts are calling it a non-binding verbal understanding that each country is reading however it wants for domestic audiences. There's been no joint U.S.-Israeli statement to clarify the scope. That ambiguity might have been necessary to get the ceasefire signed at all, but it means the violence in Lebanon could easily spiral and pull the broader agreement apart.
Let's step back and look at the scale of this conflict. What do we know about the military toll?
PBS News reported that the U.S. struck more than 13,000 targets during what the military called Operation Epic Fury. That includes IRGC headquarters and the assassination of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei early in the conflict. His son, Mojtaba Khamenei, has reportedly assumed power in Tehran. The White House says Iran's nuclear facilities and ballistic missile programs have been, quote, perfectly taken care of, end quote. But Secretary of State Marco Rubio has made clear that the removal of enriched uranium and dismantling of missile capabilities remain core objectives, suggesting the job isn't finished.
How are global markets reacting to all of this?
The relief rally was enormous. NPR reported Brent crude plunged 13% to about $94.74 a barrel. PBS News noted that U.S. crude futures dropped 18% to $92.60. The S&P 500 surged 2.4%. Markets had been under tremendous pressure from disruptions to oil shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, so even a fragile ceasefire was enough to trigger a massive swing.
There was also a hostage development. What can you tell us?
Secretary of State Rubio confirmed the release of Shelley Kittleson, an American freelance journalist. She'd been kidnapped about a week ago by the Iranian-backed militia Kataib Hezbollah in Iraq. Rubio credited a multi-agency effort alongside Iraqi partners for getting her out safely. It's a bit of welcome news amid all the uncertainty, and the timing suggests her release may have been part of the broader diplomatic maneuvering.
Back here at home, the political fallout has been intense. What's happening in Congress?
Even with the ceasefire in place, Democratic lawmakers are pushing forward on impeachment. Al Jazeera and Fox News both report that Representative John Larson, a Democrat from Connecticut, has introduced 13 articles of impeachment against President Trump. The charges center on what Larson calls the usurpation of congressional war powers and threats of war crimes, tied to that civilization-ending ultimatum. Representative R.O. Khanna has gone even further, calling for the invocation of the 25th Amendment, describing the president's rhetoric as unstable.
Were there any notable international reactions before the deal came together?
Pope Leo XIV issued a striking condemnation, calling the threat of total destruction, quote, truly unacceptable, end quote, and pleading for dialogue. There were celebrations in the streets of Tehran and Baghdad once word of the ceasefire spread, but Gulf Arab states are far more cautious. They're worried that if the U.S. actually agrees to withdraw troops from the region as Iran's plan demands, it would leave them exposed. So the mood really depends on where you are in the world.
What should we be watching for in the days ahead?
Friday's talks in Islamabad are the immediate flashpoint. The nuclear enrichment dispute and the question of Lebanon could both blow up negotiations before they gain any traction. Israeli operations against Hezbollah are ongoing, and Iran's military still has its hand on the trigger. This 2-week window is fragile, and both sides know it. The next few days will tell us whether this is the beginning of a real peace process or just a brief pause before things escalate again?
Ethan, thank you for walking us through all of that. We'll stay on this story as it develops.
Thanks, Grace.
We've got one more story this morning, and it's a big one. There's a legal battle playing out right now between cities and states over who should pay for climate disasters. Chloe's been following this closely. Chloe, what's going on here?
Grace, legal analysts and advocacy groups are now calling this an economic civil war. That's not hyperbole. What we're seeing is municipal governments, mostly in blue-leaning areas, suing fossil fuel companies for billions in climate-related damages. And on the other side, Republican-led state legislatures are racing to pass laws that would make those lawsuits essentially impossible. ProPublica and the Candle Publishing have both been investigating this, and what they found is a coordinated top-down campaign to grant oil and gas companies near-total immunity from these suits.
So when you say coordinated, who exactly is organizing this effort?
ProPublica identifies Leonard Leo as a central figure. He's the conservative activist managing a $1.6 billion dark money fund. His organization, the 85 Fund, reportedly funnels money through a group called Donors Trust to outfits like Consumers, Research, led by Will Hild, and the Alliance for Consumers, led by Ormel Skinner. Those groups have been drafting what insiders call ready-made model legislation. They've presented these bills at summits held by the American Legislative Exchange Council, known as ALEC, which has long been a clearinghouse for conservative state-level policy.
And who's doing the actual lobbying to get these bills passed?
That's where a firm called Veridon Strategies comes in. It's led by Catherine Gunsalis, a former Heritage Action staffer. Her firm has registered to lobby in 25 states, which tells you the scale of this. On top of that, the American Petroleum Institute has publicly declared that defeating climate liability lawsuits is its top priority for 2026. So you've got the think tanks writing the bills, the lobbyists pushing them through state houses, and the industry trade group backing it all up.
What do these bills actually do? How are they trying to shut down the lawsuits?
There are really two main approaches. The first targets what's called public nuisance law. Historically, a public nuisance is anything that interferes with public health or community rights. Cities like Honolulu and Boulder have used that theory to argue that fossil fuel emissions have damaged their infrastructure. But these new state laws try to narrow the definition of public nuisance down to minor local complaints, like a noisy bar or an overgrown lot. They also strip cities of the right to file nuisance claims and hand that power exclusively to the state attorney general.
And if the attorney general doesn't want to sue, nobody sues?
Exactly, that's the whole point. The second approach is even more aggressive. It's a model bill called the Energy Freedom Act. It's already appeared in various forms in Utah, Indiana, and Tennessee. The basic idea is that if a fossil fuel company hasn't violated the Federal Clean Air Act, it gets blanket immunity for anything related to greenhouse gas emissions. Proponents like Will Hild have described the climate lawsuits as, quote, woke lawfare, end quote, and an attempt to tax energy companies through the courts rather than through the legislature.
How widespread is this? Are we talking about a handful of states or something much bigger?
Much bigger. As of today, at least 15 bills have been introduced or passed across 11 states. That includes Oklahoma, Alabama, Missouri, South Carolina, Louisiana, and Kansas, among others. Utah and Indiana have already successfully enacted their versions into law. And with Veridon Strategies registered in 25 states, there's every reason to think more bills are coming. This isn't a scattershot effort, it's a rolling campaign, and it's moving fast.
So what's really at stake for the fossil fuel industry? Why go to this length?
The numbers are staggering. The industry is currently facing more than 30 significant lawsuits nationwide. Some estimates link U.S. emissions to over $10 trillion in total damages. Climate disasters alone are now costing the country somewhere between $350 billion and $450 billion every single year. But ProPublica reports that what the industry fears most isn't even the final verdicts. It's the discovery phase.
Why is discovery so scary for them?
Because discovery is the part of a trial where plaintiffs get to dig through internal documents and depose executives under oath. And previous investigations and court filings have already uncovered some truly damning material. For example, a 1968 report prepared for the American Petroleum Institute warned that environmental damage from carbon dioxide could be severe by the year 2000. A 1977 Exxon briefing by scientist James Black told management that fossil fuel use was influencing global climate. Then there's what's known as the Cohen Memo from 1982, where Exxon correctly predicted the greenhouse effect would be detectable by the 1990s.
So they knew decades ago. Was there evidence they tried to cover it up?
Yes. A 1998 API document called the Global Climate Science Communications Plan explicitly laid out a strategy to manufacture public doubt about climate science. That's the kind of evidence that could be devastating in front of a jury. And the deeper these cases get into discovery, the more documents like that are likely to surface. So from the industry's perspective, killing these lawsuits at the state legislative level is far preferable to fighting them in a courtroom where those internal records become public.
What are the cities doing to fight back? They're not just taking this lying down, right?
Not at all. Municipal plaintiffs are using several legal strategies. In Boulder, Colorado, and Honolulu, Hawaii, cities are invoking what's called home rule authority. They're arguing that state legislatures can't prevent local governments from seeking compensation for local harms, like infrastructure damage from wildfires or sea level rise. There's also the vested rights doctrine, which says that if a lawsuit was already in the system before one of these new laws passed, the law can't be applied retroactively to kill it. That's a significant argument for the cases that have been working through courts for years now.
Are cities finding other legal theories to get around the public nuisance restrictions?
They are, and this is where things get creative. Many jurisdictions, including some in California, are pivoting away from public nuisance entirely. Instead, they're emphasizing consumer protection and deceptive trade practices claims. The argument is that these companies committed fraud and failed to warn the public about risks they knew about for decades. That sidesteps the nuisance laws completely. And in Hawaii, plaintiffs are using constitutional provisions called green amendments, which guarantee a right to a clean environment, to challenge whether the state can even pass these preemption laws in the first place.
Are the SHIELD laws themselves facing legal challenges?
They absolutely are, and legal experts see several weak points. First, there's a separation of powers argument. Critics say that when a legislature passes a law that effectively decides the outcome of pending court cases, it's stepping into the judiciary's role. Second, some state constitutions, like Utah's, have what's called an open courts or right to remedy clause. If a city suffers real property damage from climate events and the state bars it from seeking any compensation, that could violate those constitutional guarantees. Third, there's the special legislation problem. Most state constitutions prohibit laws that grant exclusive immunity to a single industry. Singling out fossil fuel companies for protection while leaving tobacco or pharmaceutical companies fully exposed is a difficult thing to defend constitutionally.
Now, the industry has pushed back on the narrative that cities are the underdogs here, hasn't it?
They have. The fossil fuel side points out that the municipal lawsuits aren't exactly grassroots either. Most of the plaintiff cities are represented by one firm, Scher Edling, which has received support from the Rockefeller Family Fund and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Investigations have also highlighted the role of Arabella Advisors, which is a massive dark money clearinghouse for progressive causes managing funds like the New Venture Fund. The House Committee on Oversight and Accountability has compared that network to the Leonard Leo-led conservative apparatus. So both sides are essentially accusing each other of using private wealth to shape public policy outside the normal legislative process.
So where does this all head from here?
Right now, it's a tug of war. States like Utah and Indiana have locked-in protections for the industry. But cities in Colorado, Hawaii, and California are pushing deeper into the discovery phase of their cases. The pro-industry side's ultimate play, according to analysts, appears to be creating a direct conflict between state laws and municipal rights that forces either the U.S. Supreme Court or Congress to step in. If that happens, whatever they decide could reshape corporate accountability for climate damage for decades to come. There's no resolution in sight.
Chloe, thank you for breaking all of that down for us. That is a complicated story with enormous stakes on both sides.
Thanks, Grace.
Here are some other headlines. The Artemis II mission has entered its 8th day, and things are looking up, way up. The Orion spacecraft, aptly named Integrity, is currently on the final leg of its journey back to Earth after a lunar flyby that was truly over the moon. On Tuesday night, the crew successfully fired a 15-second return trajectory correction burn to ensure they make a splash in the Pacific Ocean this April 10th. This mission has already gone the distance, reaching 252,756 miles from Earth on April 6th, eclipsing the record set by Apollo 13. Commander Reed Wiseman, pilot Victor Glover, and mission specialists Christina Koch and Jeremy Hansen are staying grounded despite the heights, testing biological monitoring garments and manual piloting modes. NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman is already looking to accelerate Artemis III, while President Donald Trump praised these modern-day pioneers for paving the way for a permanent lunar base under his Moon to Mars policy. In a courtroom development that is certainly not a beach read, 62-year-old former architect Rex Heuermann is expected to plead guilty today in Riverhead regarding the Gilgo Beach serial killings. Heuermann is laying the foundation for a resolution to this decade-old mystery by admitting to a superseding indictment for the murders of 7 women, plus an 8th, the 1996 killing of Karen Vergata. This 11 a.m. appearance before State Supreme Court Justice Timothy Mazzei helps the families find closure and ensures the suspect won't be building a life outside of prison as he faces life without parole. It seems the prosecution really had a pizza his mind after a discarded crust provided the pivotal DNA match. Suffolk County District Attorney Ray Tierney will address the public at 2-page M to discuss how this plea helps everyone finally breathe a sigh of relief. Moving to the Capitol, the White House is asking for an arm and a leg, and then some. A historic $1.5 trillion defense budget request for fiscal year 2027 has been submitted, representing a 42% surge in military spending. This proposal includes a $1.15 trillion base request and $350 billion through a reconciliation package to bypass Senate hurdles. The administration is looking to be the master of its own dome, allocating $185 billion for the Golden Dome missile defense shield and funds for the 6th-generation F-47 fighter. They also plan to ship out a Golden Fleet of 123 new vessels. To pay the piper, the plan suggests $73 billion in cuts to domestic programs like education and health research, though the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget warns this could add nearly $7 trillion to the national debt over the next decade. Overseas, the peace process is hitting a few bumps in the road. The Israeli Prime Minister's office clarified today that the 2-week ceasefire brokered between the United States and Iran does not include Lebanon. While Israel is on board with the decision to suspend strikes against Iran, provided the Strait of Hormuz stays open, they are not pausing their pursuit of Hezbollah. This announcement pours cold water on claims from Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif that the truce was a universal everywhere agreement. Finally, global markets are experiencing a bit of whiplash today. Stocks took a leap of faith after the ceasefire news, with Germany's DAX soaring 5.2% and the FTSE 100 hitting a peak. Meanwhile, oil prices took a dive, with Brent crude plunging 15% to fall below $100 a barrel. It is a crude awakening for those who bet on continued conflict, as investors move away from the turbulent trading that previously wiped $2.5 trillion from global bond values. Everyone is looking toward the Islamabad negotiations this Friday to see if this rally has legs or if the volatility will return. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Opus 4.6, Gemini Pro 3.1, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.